Margaret Vale stood in the middle of the courthouse steps, handed a folded paper to the sheriff, and said loud enough for the whole street to hear, "Take the girl tonight. I don't care if she's asleep, I don't care if she's crying, and I don't care what that ranch hand thinks he is to her. She has my sister's blood, and she is coming home with me." Then she smiled. She actually smiled, and she smoothed her gloves, and she added, "And burn the paperwork on the well. Let them go thirsty a while. Thirsty men sign anything." 90 miles away, a woman with 11 swallows of water left in her canteen was about to give every drop of it to two strangers dying in the dirt, never knowing the man's name was worth more than the county. If a story like that keeps you sitting up past your bedtime, do me a kindness. Tap subscribe so the next one finds you. Hit that like button, and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels tonight. Now let's go back to the beginning, to the summer the wells went quiet. Clara Voss had counted her water 3 times that morning and gotten a different answer each time, which told her more about her hands than about the water. The bucket came up from the well with a sound she had learned to hate. A scrape, not a splash. She hauled it anyway, arm over arm, because there was nothing else to do with the morning. What she got for her trouble was maybe 2 inches of something the color of weak coffee, with grit riding in it. She stood there in the door of the well house with her hair stuck to her neck and did the arithmetic she'd been doing since May. 2 inches. 2 days if she was careful, 1 if she wasn't. She had been careful for 11 weeks. Careful hadn't done a thing for her but stretch out the waiting. "All right," she said out loud, because the sound of a voice was the only medicine left in the county. "All right then." The garden was past saving, and she knew it, but she went out and looked at it anyway, the way people go look at a grave they've already cried over. The bean rows were nothing but string and gray sticks. The squash had gone flat and papery, like something a fire had already been through and lost interest in. She'd planted that garden in April with more hope than sense, on the strength of a spring rain that turned out to be the only one they'd get. Down the slope, in the bottom where a creek used to run, the willows were dead standing up. Clara Voss was 32 years old. She had been a wife for 4 years and a mother for 6 days, and she had been neither one for going on 3 years now, and she'd found that people in town never knew how to hold that information. They'd get a look. They'd start a sentence and abandon it halfway. After a while, she stopped going in more than she had to, which suited everybody, including her. She went back inside, put the 2 inches of water in the crock, covered it with a plate, and sat down on the edge of the bed with her hands on her knees. The cabin was 1 room and a lean-to. It smelled like dust and old smoke, and the lavender she'd hung up 2 summers ago that had long since given up any pretense of smelling like lavender. She thought about Denver. Her brother-in-law had written twice. The second letter had been kinder than the first, which somehow made it worse. The kindness of a man who'd talked it over with his wife and gotten permission. "You would have your own room. Adele says the children would be a comfort to you." Clara had read that line about 40 times. The children would be a comfort to her, as though grief were a chair you could sit in until it got soft. She hadn't answered either letter. There was a stamp in the tin on the shelf and she hadn't used it, and she couldn't have told anybody why, except that the day she used it would be the day she agreed with everyone about what she was. The cry came around 4 in the afternoon. She thought it was a bird first. That's the honest truth of it. She thought it was one of those hawks that had been circling the low country all week, and she went right on scraping the char out of her stove. Then it came again, and it was wrong for a bird. It went up and broke in the middle. Clara stood very still with the rag in her hand. She was not a brave woman. She wants that understood, if anybody ever asks. What she was, that afternoon, was a woman who had gone 11 weeks without one single thing happening to her. And there is a kind of hunger that isn't for food or water at all. She took the rifle down off the pegs. It was her husband's rifle, a Winchester with a crack in the stock she'd wrapped in wet rawhide 4 years ago and never gotten around to fixing properly. She checked the load. Then she went out into the heat with the sun sitting on her shoulders like a hand pushing her down. The sound took her 3/4 of a mile down the wash, past the dead willows, out to where the valley opened up flat and white. Twice she stopped and heard nothing and told herself she was a fool. Twice she went on. She saw the girl first, a child, face down in the crusted mud where the creek had been, one arm flung out and a bonnet with the ribbon torn off lying 6 feet away like it had been thrown. Clara's whole chest went cold in a way it had no business doing in that heat. Then the mud moved, 40 feet past the child, and Clara nearly fired. It was a man. He was crawling. That's the only word for it. He wasn't walking. He wasn't dragging himself in a straight line either. He was going forward in a sort of ruined half-crawl with one leg trailing wrong behind him, and he was moving toward the girl about as fast as a man can move who has been doing it a long time and doesn't know how to stop. Clara said, "Hey!" It came out as nothing. She swallowed and got a real voice up. "Hey, you there!" He didn't look at her. That was the thing she'd think about later in the small hours. He didn't look up, didn't check to see if she had a gun on him, didn't do a single thing a sane man does when a stranger yells at him in open country. He just kept going toward the child. She came down the bank with the rifle across her body. Close up, he was worse. His lips had split into black lines. There was blood-dried brown all down one side of his shirt and something wrong with his left leg below the knee that she made herself not look at directly. Mister, stop, look at me." He got a hand out and caught the toe of her boot. "Water." His voice sounded like two dry boards. She stopped talking. About noon she stopped. "Please." "I've got you. Let go of my boot. I've got you." "Please." Clara knelt. She had the canteen off her shoulder and in her hands, and she felt the weight of it, and there is no dressing it up. She hesitated. She sat there in the mud with a dying child 8 steps away, and she thought, "That's my Thursday and my Friday in there." She thought it clear as a bell. She has never once pretended otherwise. Then she thought about the crock in her cabin with a plate over it and the stamp in the tin on the shelf, and how she had been sitting in one room for 3 years waiting for something to make a decision for her. "Nothing's going to make it for you," she said out loud. "What?" "Nothing. Don't move." She went to the girl, turned her over as gentle as she knew how. The child was maybe 7, 8, small though, so maybe older and just small. And her skin was hot and dry as a stone off a hearth, and she wasn't sweating at all, which Clara knew was the bad sign, the one that meant the body had quit trying. Her eyes came halfway open and rolled and didn't find anything. Clara got the canteen to her mouth and tipped it, and the water ran straight out the corner and down her neck. No, honey, come on." She sat down flat in the mud, hauled the child up against her chest, tipped the head forward instead of back, wet her own 2 fingers, and put them to the girl's lips. Again. "There you are. There. Little bit. That's all you get. Little bit at a time, or you'll bring it back up." Behind her, the man was making a sound she'd rather not describe. "You hush," Clara said without turning. "You hush and save it. She's swallowing." It took her a long while. The sun moved a hand's width. When the canteen had maybe a third left, she stopped and made herself stop, and she crawled back over to the man and held it out. Mouthful. 1. He shook his head. His eyes were bloodshot to the point they looked bruised. "Give it her." "You give out on me, mister. I've got to carry 2. Take the mouthful." "Give it her." Clara looked at him a second. Then she took his jaw in her hand, not gentle, and tipped the canteen against his teeth. "You are not the only stubborn person in this valley," she said. "Swallow." He swallowed. Then he started to cry, which is an ugly thing in a grown man with no water in him, all sound and no tears, and Clara looked away out of decency and screwed the cap back on. Carrying the girl 3/4 of a mile uphill in that heat is not a thing Clara likes to talk about either. She fell twice. The second time she stayed down long enough that the man, who was following her by inches, called out something she couldn't hear, and the fear that he'd die out there while she rested got her up off her knees more than any strength did. She put the girl on her own bed, got the plate off the crock. 2 inches of gritty water, and she used all of it in the next 2 hours, a spoon at a time, on a child she'd never seen before that day. The man made it to her door at dusk and got about 4 feet inside before his arms quit. Clara dragged him the rest of the way by the back of his shirt, apologized to him for it, and got a blanket rolled under his head. She's swallowing. She swallowed 9 times, I counted." 9. He laughed, or something adjacent to it. 9. "What's her name?" "Lydia." He said it like he was setting something down carefully. "Lydia Wilder. She's 8 in October." "And you?" "Ethan." "Ethan what?" There was a pause there. Clara noticed it and filed it away and didn't ask again, not that night. "Wilder," he said. "Ethan Wilder." She built up the stove to boil what was left in the well bucket, and while it heated, she cut his trouser leg open with her sewing scissors, and what she saw made her sit back on her heels and breathe once through her nose. How long ago? 3 days? Maybe 4? A horse went over on me in a wash. He had his forearm over his eyes. I got her out from under the wagon. Then I don't remember a lot. There was a wagon? There was a wagon. Where's the wagon now, Mr. Wilder? He took his arm off his eyes and looked at the ceiling for a while. I imagine it's still where it stopped, he said. That was the first lie he told her, or anyway the first thing that wasn't a lie, but wasn't the truth either. And Clara, who had spent 3 years alone getting very good at listening to how people say things, heard it land. She let it sit. There was a child on her bed who had swallowed 9 times, and a man on her floor with a leg that was going to need more than she had, and the truth could keep till morning. Around midnight, the girl started shivering, which Clara took as good news, and around 2 she said a word. Clara leaned in. She said it again. Papa. He's here. Clara found the man's wrist in the dark and put it up on the edge of the bed so the child's hand could find it. Right here. He's not going anywhere. He can't hardly move. The girl's fingers closed on his thumb. Ethan Wilder said, very quietly, Thank you. Don't. I'll pay you, whatever you... Don't do that either. Clara's voice came out harder than she meant it. Not tonight. Tonight it's just a thing that happened. She sat up the rest of the night in the chair by the stove with her hands wrapped around a cup that had nothing in it. Morning came the color of a bad bruise. Clara went out to the well at first light and hauled up 1.5 inches and stood there looking at it a long time, doing arithmetic that didn't work anymore. 2 inches for one person was 2 days. 1.5 inches for 3 people was... She stopped. There wasn't a word for what it was. Then she looked up the slope and saw the girl standing in the doorway of the cabin, holding on to the frame with both hands, watching her. You're supposed to be flat on your back, Clara said. I heard a bucket. You did. The child considered her with a directness Clara wasn't ready for. Are you the one who found us? I'm the one who found you. Papa said an angel found us. Well, Clara said, your papa had a fever. Lydia thought that over. You have a gun. I do. Angels don't have guns. There you go, Clara said. You're a sensible girl. Come sit down before you fall down. That was the morning it started. The thing Clara had spent 3 years building a wall against. The child sat on the step with a cup and asked her 40 questions, and Clara answered about 30 of them. And by the time the sun was full up, she had caught herself smiling twice, and each time it felt like touching something hot. Ethan couldn't stand. He tried at noon, got his good leg under him, made it halfway upright with a hand on the table, and went down so hard the whole cabin shook. Clara got him back onto the floor and told him if he did it again, she'd tie him to the stove leg. I need to get to Holloway, he said. His face was gray. I need to send word. To who? Men who work for me. Uh-huh. Clara wrung out a rag. How many men would that be? The pause again. Longer this time. Some. Mr. Wilder. She sat back. You crawled 4 days across a dry creek bed with a broke leg and a little girl. That's not a man with some men. That's a man who couldn't go anywhere he'd be recognized. He looked at her then. Really looked, for the first time since the wash. And she saw him make a decision behind his eyes. How far to your nearest neighbor? 9 miles. Good. He let his head go back against the wall. Ma'am, I'm going to ask you for something worse than water. Go on. If riders come? If anybody comes up that trail asking after a man and a girl, I need you to say you never saw us. Clara set the rag down. You're going to have to give me more than that. I know. You're in my house, on my floor, with my daughter's blanket under your head. She hadn't meant to say my daughter's. It came out and sat in the room, and she didn't take it back. You're going to have to give me a great deal more than that. Ethan Wilder closed his eyes. There's a woman, he said, who wants my child. She has money, she has lawyers, and she has a paper from a judge that she got by swearing to things about me that aren't true. 6 weeks ago, she sent 3 men to take Lydia off my own porch while I was in Bozeman. When that didn't work, she took a different road. He opened his eyes. The wagon didn't go over in a wash, ma'am. Somebody put a rifle ball into my horse's chest at 40 yards on open ground. And when I went off, they came down to look. And I heard one of them say the girl had to be found first. Not the man. The girl. The stove ticked. Then they lost us, he said, because I went the one direction a sane man wouldn't, which is into 90 miles of country with no water in it. That's the whole of it. I've got a leg that won't hold me, a daughter who nearly died in your arms last night, and no way on earth to stop them if they come up that trail this afternoon." Clara stood up slowly. She walked to the door and looked out at the white valley and the dead willows and the trail coming up from the bottom, one thin, pale line that anybody could follow. 3 years she'd been waiting for something to make a decision for her. "Lydia," she called, not loud. "Honey, come inside and get away from that window." Behind her, Ethan said, "You could put us in the wagon road and be shut of this by dark. I wouldn't hold it against you. I'd tell you to." "I know you would." "Then, Mr. Wilder." Clara took her husband's rifle down off the pegs a second time and set it across the table where a person coming through the door would see it before they saw anything else. "I gave that child every drop of water I owned yesterday. I'm not going to hand her to somebody now to save myself the trouble." She sat down in the chair facing the door. "So you'd best start at the beginning," she said, "and tell me that woman's name." Her name was Margaret Vale. Ethan said it the way a man says the name of something that has been eating at him so long it's worn a groove. Not with heat, not anymore, but with a kind of tired precision, the way you describe a wound you've stopped expecting to heal. "She was my wife's sister," he said. "Older by 4 years. Caroline looked up to her whole life, and Margaret let her because that's the kind of woman she is. The kind who needs somebody beneath her to feel tall." Clara didn't say anything. She kept her eyes on the trail. "When Caroline died," he stopped, swallowed. "Lydia was 5. She'd had a fever 2 weeks before and we thought we were through it, but it came back different." He said it flat, the way you say something you've rehearsed into the ground, because it's the only way to say it without coming apart. "She was gone inside of 3 days. The cabin was very quiet, except for Lydia in the corner, doing what children do when adults are talking about things, pretending to be absorbed in a piece of string while actually listening to every syllable. 6 months later, Margaret came to the ranch, said she'd come to check on us, said Caroline would have wanted it." He looked at his leg and away from it. "I think she meant that at first. I think she looked at Lydia and genuinely meant it. But Margaret Vale doesn't stay simple for long. She saw the house, she saw the land, she saw Lydia. And something in her decided." "Decided what?" "That the whole situation needed managing, that I wasn't equal to it, that Caroline's daughter belonged in a proper home with a proper woman running it, not out on a cattle operation with a man who worked 14 hours a day and smelled like horses." He almost smiled at that. Not quite. "She started with suggestions, then complaints, then she went to Bozeman and came back with a lawyer." "On what grounds?" "Neglect." The word came out sharp as a cut. "She said I left Lydia unsupervised with hired men. She said there'd been an incident, some accident with a fence and a horse that left a bruise on Lydia's arm. She said I drank." He looked at Clara directly. "I don't drink." "I didn't ask." "I know. I'm telling you anyway because she's very good at it, and I'd rather you hear it from me first." Clara absorbed that. "The judge in Bozeman," Ethan continued, "is named Harlan Cruz. He went to school with Margaret's late husband. They've had dinner at her table about 40 times. He let that land on its own, without editorializing. He issued a custody evaluation order in June, said he'd rule in September, and in July, 3 men came onto my porch at dusk while Lydia was inside eating supper, and they told me Margaret wanted the girl delivered to her house in Bozeman by the 15th. And if you said no..." The one in front said, "Mr. Wilder, nobody's asking." Clara turned from the window. Ethan was looking at the ceiling again, that particular exhausted upward look of a man who has been turning the same thing over and over until there's nothing left to turn. "I got Lydia up the back stairs, got her on a horse, and rode before they could get around the house. We've been out 11 days. I was taking a southern route toward a man I trust in Hardin, a lawyer who isn't Harlan Cruz's dinner guest. And then somebody found us on the Yellowstone cutoff, and a horse went down, and then..." He gestured with 2 fingers at the ceiling, and then an angel with a rifle and a half-empty canteen found what was left. In the corner, Lydia looked up from her string. "You said angels don't have guns," she said to Clara, perfectly serious. "I said your papa had a fever." "You both said things." "We both said things," Clara agreed. "Go see if there's anything left of those biscuits from yesterday." Lydia went, because she was a child who understood that some conversations had a door and she'd just been shown it. But she went slowly. Clara turned back to Ethan. The men who came after you, are they Margaret's or the law's? Her money, her orders. The one in front was a man named Cord. He's been in her employ 2 years. I know him by sight. Would he know this cabin? He'd know the county. He'd ask around. There's nobody to ask on this end of the valley. There's the road into Halloway. The road into Halloway goes past 4 farms, Clara said. 3 of them are empty this summer. The Prentice place is the only one with anybody in it, and old Dolph Prentice doesn't talk to strangers, and he's half deaf besides. Ethan was quiet a moment. He was reading her the way a man reads a road, looking for where it's solid. You know this country. I've lived here 4 years. Alone? It was a question that didn't have a rude intention behind it, she decided. It was just the question a person asks when they're trying to understand the terrain. Since the spring before last, she said. Yes. He didn't follow it up. She respected him a little for that. The afternoon came down hot, and Lydia slept in the heat the way children do, suddenly, completely, like a lamp turned off. And Clara and Ethan talked in voices that barely carried across the room. She made him tell her everything again, slower, and she listened for the pieces that didn't fit, and there weren't many, which either meant he was telling the truth or he was very practiced at the shape of it. She decided it was probably the truth. Practiced liars didn't crawl 4 days to get there. She cooked what she had, which wasn't much. Dried beans she'd stretched 3 days running, the last of a cornmeal she'd been rationing since June, and 2 strips of smoked meat she'd been saving for a reason she couldn't have named and now had one. Ethan ate like a man who hadn't been able to eat while there was still a child in danger. That is, he ate like he was ashamed of being hungry and couldn't help it. Lydia ate without shame, which Clara liked. What happened to your family? Lydia said, looking at the second bed frame against the wall, the one Clara used for storage. The room went still. Lydia, Ethan said. It's there, the girl said, reasonably, with the boxes on it. It's all right, Clara said, though her voice had gone a half step flat. I had a husband. I had a baby. I don't anymore. Lydia looked at her, turning that over with the seriousness of a child working through arithmetic. Did they go away? They did. Like Mama. Like your mama. Lydia put her spoon down and seemed to consider all of that for a while. Then she said, That's a lot of going away for one house. Clara said, It is. No wonder you didn't have water for anybody. You had to use it up crying. Ethan said her name sharply. No. Clara shook her head. No, she's right. That's exactly right. She looked at the child a second. How old are you again? 8 in October. Then you're the most sensible 8 in October I ever met. That night, after Lydia was asleep between them on the wide bed because there was no other arrangement that made sense, Clara lay in the dark, listening to the wind come off the mountain and thought about the stamp in the tin on the shelf and the letter she hadn't written and the city she hadn't gone to. She thought about the cabin with boxes on the second bed. She thought about a child who said, That's a lot of going away for one house without cruelty and without pity, just with the plain accuracy of someone who hadn't learned yet to look away from true things. She didn't sleep much. Morning arrived, and with it the first real problem, which was water. What they had wouldn't last 2 more days between 3 people in that heat. Clara went out before dawn, walked the upper draw, found a seep in the rock she'd known about since fall, and ignored because it took 40 minutes to collect a cup. She collected 3 cups, came back, and said nothing about where they'd come from because there was no point in describing a problem she'd already solved. The second problem arrived mid-morning. She heard it before she saw it. A horse, not hurrying, on the lower trail. One horse, which was either better or worse than several, and she didn't know which yet. She took the rifle and went to the door. It was a boy. 12, 13. The Dennison boy from a farm she'd thought abandoned, and he pulled up short when he saw the rifle and said, Mrs. Voss, ma'am, I got told to bring a message. By who? Man on the road. He gave me 50 cents and a piece of paper. He held out a folded square, keeping one eye on the rifle. Clara took it. She opened it one-handed. It said, We know the girl is somewhere in this county. Return her to the Halloway sheriff by sundown tomorrow, and no harm comes to the man or the woman harboring them. This is a legal matter. Don't make it something else. It wasn't signed. Clara refolded it. You ride hard back the way you came, she told the boy. Don't stop and don't tell anybody else what you saw up here. What do I tell the man if he asks me? Tell him you rode up and found an empty cabin. She reached in her apron pocket and found a quarter which she couldn't spare and gave it to him anyway. Ride. He rode. She went inside and put the note on the table in front of Ethan without a word. He read it. His jaw went hard. He looked up. How'd they know the county? They didn't. It says somewhere in this county. That's a guess and pressure, not information. Somebody's riding a circuit and leaving these at every farm. She sat down. They gave you till sundown tomorrow. We can't be here by sundown tomorrow. I know. I can't walk. I know that too. Lydia appeared in the doorway from the lean-to, reading both their faces with a child's uncomfortable accuracy. What happened? Nothing yet, Clara said. Come sit down. That means something. Lydia. It does. Papa makes that same face when something happens. Ethan folded the paper smaller and put it in his shirt pocket in a gesture Clara recognized. The gesture of a man putting a bad thing away to deal with later, buying time. She'd done the same thing with the letters from Denver. We need a horse, Clara said, and a way to move you that isn't going to open that leg up again, and a road to Hardin that doesn't go through Halloway. The high pass, 40 miles north of here, there's a crossing. 40 miles is 4 days on foot with a child. Then we need the horse first. There's one horse, Clara said. Within any distance I'm willing to walk and then walk back from, and it belongs to Dolph Prentice, the deaf man, the half-deaf man. He can hear you if you speak up. She drummed 2 fingers on the table once. I traded Dolph Prentice out of a mule last winter for 3 jars of preserves and a promise to haul his firewood in November. He was pleased with that trade. He might be willing to do something similar for a horse. With what? Clara looked at the cabin around her. 4 years of a life that hadn't amounted to much in terms of property. A Winchester with a wrapped stock. A good Dutch oven. 2 jars of choke cherry preserves she'd put up from the last of the wild fruit before the drought took everything. A silver clasp that had been her mother's and that she wore exactly never but had kept because some things you keep. I'll figure that out when I get there, she said. She left Ethan with the rifle and a talking to she felt ridiculous giving. You cannot put weight on that leg, I mean it. If you fall in here with no one around, you will lie there. And she left Lydia with instructions to pour the remaining water slowly. If her father's fever came back, and to not under any circumstances open the door. What if it's you? Lydia said. I'll knock 3 times. Anything else? Don't answer. What if they break it? Clara looked at the child. She thought about lying, which would have been kinder, and then thought about what Lydia had already been through in the last 2 weeks. There's a space under the bed on the left side, behind the trunk. It's narrow enough for you and not for a man. You know your father's rifle. He taught me to load it. Good. I'm not telling you to shoot anybody. I'm telling you that a man who hears a rifle being cocked in the dark rethinks his plans. Can you do that? Lydia looked back at her with those direct, uncomplicated eyes. Yes, she said. It was the most frightening thing Clara had heard all week, and also, somehow, the thing that made her feel least alone. She put her hand on the child's head for a moment. Just a moment, just the weight of a hand. And then she went. The walk to the Prentice farm was 3 miles by the track and 2.5 through the upper draw, and Clara went through the draw because she didn't feel like being on the track if anybody was riding it. She went fast, not running, but the long stride of a woman who grew up in hill country and knew how to eat ground. Dolph Prentice was splitting wood behind his barn, which Clara took as a good sign because it meant he was in a working mood, and Dolph Prentice in a working mood was easier than Dolph Prentice in a sitting mood. He heard her coming and turned around with the axe in both hands, which she also took as a good sign, because a man who keeps hold of his axe when he's startled is a man who's been working hard enough that his nerves are occupied. Mrs. Voss, he said. Mr. Prentice. She came to within easy speaking distance. I need to buy the bay horse. She's not for sale. I know she's not. I'm asking anyway. Dolph Prentice had a face like a fence post that had weathered 30 winters, and he looked at her with it in his way, measuring something she couldn't see the scale for. You in trouble? He said. She could have said no. It would have been insulting, and he would have known it. I've got a man and a little girl at my place, she said. The man's got a broke leg, and somebody is looking for the girl with bad intentions. I need to get them to Hardin by the North Road, and I need a horse to do it. Dolph set the axe against the block. Somebody look like law. They're carrying papers from a judge. Whether that makes them law depends on your view of things. He grunted. I got no view of things. Mr. Prentice, I've got 2 jars of choke cherry preserves, a Dutch oven that cost $4 in Miles City, and every cord of firewood I can cut between now and first snow. She paused. And when this is settled, I believe the man at my cabin will be in a position to do more than that. I can't speak to what. You don't know who he is. I know who he is, I just don't know exactly what he is yet. Dolph picked up the axe again and split a round that hadn't needed splitting and set the 2 halves aside. I'll lend you the horse, he said, and the saddle. I can't pay you back alone at the same rate as a sale. I said lend. You can bring her back when you're done. Or not. He picked up another round. I'm 71 years old, Mrs. Voss. I don't need a horse bad enough to see a child come to grief over one. Clara stood there a second. Thank you, she said. Don't. He waved the back of his hand at her in the direction of the barn. Just go. Saddle's on the left rack. She came back to the cabin with the horse in the late afternoon, and Lydia came out the door at the sound of hooves before Clara had said a word or knocked 3 times, and Clara thought about pointing that out and decided against it. The child had been listening hard all day, and that was actually exactly right. You got a horse, Lydia said. I got a horse. Papa's going to say you didn't have to do that. Your papa's going to say a great many things. Clara tied the horse at the post. Help me figure out how to get him outside without him falling on his face. Getting Ethan upright and across the cabin floor and out the door was the kind of task that teaches a person a great deal about their own patience, which is to say, Clara learned she had less of it than she'd thought. He was heavy, he was dizzy when vertical, and he kept trying to put weight on the wrong leg out of pure stubbornness, and then catching himself with a sound that was almost but not quite a grunt. I'm not made of glass, he said. You're not made of working parts either at the moment. Lean left. I am leaning left. You're leaning wrong left. Here. She got under his right arm and took the weight and felt the whole length of him go a little less rigid, which was not a thing she spent any time thinking about. Lydia, get the door. Outside in the flat gold light of late afternoon, Ethan looked at the horse and at Clara and at Lydia standing beside her. You walked to Prentice's, there and back, and he lent her. Don't read a thing into it except that he's a decent man. Ready? Getting him mounted was worse than getting him out the door. He made it on the 3rd try, and the sound he didn't make, the one that was held behind his teeth and not let out, was somehow louder than if he had. Clara looked away and busied herself tying their supplies behind the saddle. Lydia watched her father's face and didn't look away, and Clara filed that away too. They moved north as the sun went down. Ethan on the horse, Lydia walking close enough to keep a hand on the stirrup leather, and Clara on the other side with the rifle and the canteen and the long stride she used when she was eating ground. They didn't talk much. The valley cooled faster than the day had suggested it would, and that was a mercy. After an hour, Lydia said, Miss Clara, what's in Hardin? A man your father trusts. What kind of man? A lawyer, the honest kind, if such a thing exists. Lydia looked up at her father. Does the honest kind exist? We're about to find out, Ethan said, and it was the first thing he'd said in an hour, and his voice had gone rough, from the pain or the cold or some combination. They made 6 miles before dark stopped them. Not enough, but the horse needed water, and so did all of them, and there was a dry camp and a rock cutout that would hold them out of the wind and out of sight of anything moving on the low road. Clara picketed the horse, divided what water was left with something close to military precision, and sat down with her back against the rock and the rifle across her knees. You should sleep, Ethan said. He was sitting across from her, legs stretched out, face gray even in the dark. In a while. I'll keep watch. You will absolutely not keep watch. You'll keep your legs still and let the skin start to close. She pulled her coat up. Sleep, Mr. Wilder. Ethan. Pardon? You could call me Ethan. Clara considered that for a moment. In the dark, it was easier to be straight about things. You could tell me what exactly you own, Ethan, and spare me the guessing. A pause. Why do you think I own anything? Because the woman coming after you hired 3 men and a lawyer and a judge's dinner conversation, and she's still going. People spend that kind of money when there's that kind of money to be had. She looked out at the dark. Also because the minute I got you inside, you asked how far to the nearest neighbor, not how far to the nearest town. That's a man thinking about who else might be watching, not a man thinking about where to get help. That's a man used to a certain size of problem. Silence. The Wilder Ranch, he said. You may have heard of it. She hadn't. She told him so. That surprises me, he said. We run 12,000 head. Clara turned to look at him, which was mostly useless in the dark. 12,000, give or take. And the land? Just under 60,000 acres, deeded. Another 30 held on lease. He said it without apology or pride, the way a man reports a fact about the weather. It's been wilder land since my grandfather drove the first herd up in '63. Clara sat with that number for a moment. 60,000 acres. She'd given this man her last 2 inches of water and dragged him across her cabin floor by his shirt. You might have mentioned that. When? When you were holding a rifle on me in a dry creek bed? When I was lying on your floor in the dark apologizing for existing? His voice was dry, but not unkind. When exactly was the right moment, Mrs. Voss? She didn't have an answer, which she thought said something about the question. It doesn't change anything, she said finally. Doesn't it? You'd have been just as dead. Lydia would have been just as... She stopped. No. It doesn't change anything about what needed doing. What it changes is what Margaret Vale is actually after, and now I have a clearer picture of that. She loved her sister. I don't doubt it. She may even love Lydia. I don't doubt that either. People can love a thing and still want to own it. Clara settled the rifle. That doesn't make it a reason to let her. Ethan didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, Clara. She waited. I've been doing this alone for 3 years, making every decision, fighting every fire, making sure Lydia doesn't see how much of it I'm just guessing at. He stopped. I'm telling you that so you understand I don't ask for help easy. I noticed. What I'm trying to say is that I don't know how to say thank you for what you've done without sounding like I think money fixes it. And I don't have any other language for it right now because my leg is on fire and I haven't slept in 4 days. Clara looked at the dark valley a long time. You don't have to say anything, she said. You just have to make it to harden. And then? And then we figure out the next thing. She pulled her coat tighter. That's how it goes, Ethan. You figure out the next thing and the next one after that, and eventually you're far enough from the bad day that you can breathe. Lydia had been quiet so long Clara had thought she was asleep. But from under the blanket between them, the girl said very quietly, Or you find somebody who knows where the seep in the rocks is. Clara looked down at the shape of her. Or that, she said. She kept watch until 2 in the morning when her eyes went wrong with tiredness, and she woke Ethan against his protests, and he kept it until dawn. And in the morning, when she looked at his face, he had the particular expression of a man who has been sitting in the dark with his own thoughts for several hours and hasn't come to any comfortable conclusions. She didn't ask him about it. She made the water last through breakfast and broke camp, and they started north before the heat could find them, and the horse moved steady, and the mountain came clearer ahead of them with each mile. And somewhere behind them, the deadline in the folded note in Ethan's shirt pocket was ticking down toward sundown like a clock that didn't know they weren't there to hear it. 3 miles from the Holloway cutoff, on a ridge that gave a long sight line down into the valley, Clara stopped. What? Ethan began. Quiet. She looked for a long time. 2 riders, far down, moving along the low track, moving north. Not hurrying, but not meandering either. The deliberate pace of men covering ground on a schedule. How good is your eyesight? She asked Ethan. He looked. He went still. The one on the right, he said. Gray horse. What about him? His voice had gone flat and careful. That's Cord. Clara lowered her eyes from the riders and looked at the road ahead. There was a fork 300 yards on, and the left branch went down toward Holloway, and the right one climbed and narrowed into the kind of country you needed to know to not get lost in. Do you know the high country? She asked. Not this piece of it. I do. She took the reins from his hand and turned the horse right toward the climbing road. Lydia, don't fall behind. I'm right here, Lydia said from right there. They went up into the rocks with the riders still a mile below them, and Clara pulled her hat down and moved fast and didn't look back, and the mountain closed around them like it had swallowed them whole, which is precisely what she needed it to do. Behind them, far below, she heard a shout carry on the wind. Whether it was Cord or just a man calling out to another man about something ordinary, she couldn't tell. She didn't stop to find out. The high country didn't forgive mistakes, and it didn't make exceptions for broken legs or frightened children or women who hadn't slept properly in 3 days. Clara knew this about the mountain the way she knew the seep in the rocks. Not from reading it somewhere, but from the specific education of having made every wrong choice herself first. She'd gone up this way twice in the 3 years she'd lived at the cabin below, once in late fall looking for a missing cow she never found, and once in the first winter because she'd needed to know where the road went, and sitting still in a one-room cabin had started to feel like being buried. She knew where the track split, and where it looked like it split but didn't, and where a man who didn't know better would take the wide, obvious branch and end up on a ledge above a drop with nowhere to go but back. She'd done exactly that the first time, in November, with the cow, in 6 inches of new snow. She took them up the right way now, the horse picking its footing carefully because it was a sensible horse. Dolph Prentice didn't keep foolish animals. And Lydia behind them with her hand on the stirrup leather again, not because she needed to hold on, but because it seemed to be where she put her hand when things were uncertain. Clara noticed this and said nothing about it. "How far up do we go?" Ethan asked. He was gripping the saddle horn with his right hand in a way that was not quite trying to look casual, far enough that they can't follow without knowing where they're going. She kept her eyes on the track. "There's a bench about 2 miles up. We can come back down the east side and pick up the Hardin Road above the Holloway Fork. Adds 5 miles. 5 miles. Would you prefer to go back down and say hello to Cord?" He didn't answer, which was the right answer. The bench took them the better part of 2 hours. The horse sweated, Lydia's breathing went audible on the steep parts, and Ethan's color went from gray to something closer to white that Clara checked on every few minutes with a sideways look she hoped he didn't notice. He noticed. He didn't say anything about it, which she'd started to understand was something he did. Endure quietly and let people help and hate both things at once. When they came out on the bench, the view opened up all at once, the way mountains do that without warning. The whole valley below was brown and white and still, the creek beds just pale threads, the farms small as things you could cover with your hand. Clara could see the low road from up here, both directions, and she looked for riders and found none and let herself breathe. Lydia sat down on a rock immediately, without ceremony, in the boneless way of children who are tired and don't see any reason to pretend otherwise. "My feet hurt," she announced. "I know," Clara said, "both of them." "That's usually how feet work, yes." Ethan was looking at the valley too. He had that particular expression again, the one she'd seen at the camp that morning, the one that lived behind his eyes and didn't make it all the way to his face, and she was starting to understand what it was. It wasn't grief exactly. It was the look of a man calculating how much all of this had cost, and finding the number keeps going up. "You could see the ranch from here," he said, "on a clear day. It's southeast, past that long ridge." "I'll take your word for it." "No, you—" He stopped and pointed. "That dark line where the hills cut down. That's the tree line along the Wilder Creek. The house is about a mile back from there." Clara looked. She could see the tree line, maybe, or something she was willing to call a tree line for his sake. "How many people are at the ranch right now?" she asked. 6 ranch hands, year-round, cook and her daughter. My foreman, Dale Purcell. He's been with me 15 years, he paused. And Margaret's man watching the gate, most likely. She'll have put somebody there after I ran. To report when you come back. To stop me coming back. Clara looked at the horse, who was cropping at something dry and almost certainly not worth cropping at. Can Purcell be trusted? More than anyone I know. Can he be reached without going past Margaret's man? Ethan thought about it. There's a fence road on the north pasture, comes in behind the barn. Dale would know to watch for it if he knew to watch for it. How do we tell him to watch for it? The lawyer in Hardin, James Aldridge. He's got a runner he uses. Kid named Finn, about 15, rides like something's chasing him. If Aldridge sends Finn to Dale directly with a note, Margaret's man at the gate won't know. Does Aldridge know about the custody situation? He knows about Margaret. We talked in May before the evaluation. He was the one who told me that Harlan Cruz was compromised. His jaw shifted. He also told me that without different testimony, the ruling in September would likely go her way. That Lydia would be removed from my custody pending a full review that could take another year. What testimony were you trying to get? Ethan was quiet a moment, The wind moved through the bench grass. 3 of my ranch hands saw the men Margaret sent in July. Saw them ride up, saw them on the porch, heard the conversation. 2 of them heard the specific words. His voice went careful and controlled in the way of a man who's had to hold his anger a long time. They told me they'd testify. Aldridge says their testimony alone could challenge the order and get Cruz removed from the case, but Margaret found out about it. Clara turned. How did she find out? I don't know. But 2 of the 3 men left the ranch inside of a week after Aldridge told me the plan. Packed up, collected their pay, wouldn't meet my eye. He looked at her. The 3rd one is Dale Purcell, and Dale Purcell has never in his life been the kind of man who moves for money. But that just means whatever she used on the other 2, she'll use something different on him. So you have 1 witness, and a judge who's been having dinner at her house, and a lawyer in Hardin who may or may not have a 15-year-old with a fast horse. That's the sum of it, Ethan said. That's all of it. Lydia had stopped pretending not to listen again. She was sitting on her rock with her chin in both hands, looking at her father the way Clara had seen her look at him in the cabin. That direct, reckoning look that was too old for her face and probably always had been. Papa, she said. When we get to the ranch, is Aunt Margaret going to be there? Ethan and Clara looked at each other across the horse. He answered first. I don't know, sweetheart. But she might be. She might. Lydia considered that. Does she scare you? It was the kind of question only a child asks, because it's the kind of question that has a real answer. Ethan's face did something complicated. She makes me angry, he said. Scared and angry look the same sometimes. Lydia seemed to accept that. She scares me too, she said. But less than before. Why less? The girl looked at Clara. Because before it was just us. Clara looked away, out at the valley, at the brown hills and the dry creek threads, and the long ridge where you could maybe see the tree line on a clear day if you knew where to look. She looked at it for a long time. We should move, she said. They came down the east face of the mountain in the afternoon, slower than up because the descent was harder on the horse's knees and harder on Ethan's leg, which was swelling inside the trouser Clara had cut. She could see it in how the fabric pulled. She didn't tell him what she could see, and he didn't ask. They picked up the Hardin road above the fork, as she'd said, where it was just a wagon track through scrub pine, and from there it widened out some, and the going was easier underfoot. Lydia stopped asking about her feet, which either meant they hurt less or she'd made her peace with the hurting, and Clara wasn't sure which was more likely. They reached Hardin by the next afternoon. It was not much of a town. Clara had been through it once the previous fall for supplies, and her memory of it was a main street with more mud than purpose, a general store, a livery, 2 saloons, a church nobody seemed to use, and a collection of buildings that had gone up fast and not yet decided whether they were permanent. Aldridge had his office above the hardware store, which in Clara's experience was either the sign of a modest man or one who hadn't yet earned his way to a better floor. He turned out to be both. James Aldridge was 50 or so, with the kind of face that looked like it had heard a great many things and learned to react to none of them, which is a specific type of lawyer face that Clara had seen once before and found either reassuring or infuriating depending on the circumstance. He met them at the foot of the stairs because someone, she thought probably the hardware man who'd stopped sweeping very purposefully when they rode in, had gone up to warn him. He looked at Ethan on the horse and at the leg and at Clara with the rifle and at Lydia who was dirty and tired and watching him with the intensity of a person who's learned to decide about people quickly, and he said, "Come up." Getting Ethan up a flight of stairs was worse than getting him into the saddle, and Clara thought if she had to do it again before the leg had proper attention, she was going to have words with whoever designed stairs. Aldridge held the door and didn't try to help, which was both correct and somehow irritating. Inside there was a desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, and a cot in the corner that had a blanket on it, suggesting the room served more than one purpose. "Sit him there," Aldridge said, meaning the cot. "Mrs. Voss," Clara said. "Clara Voss. I'm from the valley south of Holloway." "You found them?" "I found them." "Where?" "Dry Creek bed, east of the Yellowstone cutoff. They'd been out 11 days. Aldridge looked at Ethan in the way of a man doing arithmetic behind his face. "The horse?" "Shot out from under me on the cutoff," Ethan said. "Cord's work." "You saw Cord?" I saw him again this morning, on the low road north of Holloway. He's running a circuit on the county. Aldridge put his hands in his pockets and turned to the window, which looked out over the main street. He stood there a moment. He's not law, he said. He's not. Which means Margaret's moved past the legal play. She's decided the evaluation in September isn't going to go her way, and she's gone to the other road. He turned back. Did she know about your witnesses? The two who left. She knew about them. She couldn't have known about Dale. She may know now. She's had 3 weeks. Aldridge's face did a controlled, minimal thing that Clara read as alarm, wearing a professional suit. I'll send Finn tonight. He looked at Clara. That leg needs a doctor. There's one here, a Dr. Raines. He's adequate. More than adequate would be better, Clara said. He's what we have. Then he's what we have. She took Lydia downstairs while the doctor was sent for, and they sat on the bench outside the hardware store, and Lydia ate the last of the biscuit Clara had in her coat pocket, which was stale and a little gritty, and which Lydia ate without complaint. The street was quiet. A dog crossed from one side to the other on some purpose of its own. A woman came out of the dry goods store with a package and glanced at them and went on. Are we safe here? Lydia asked. Clara thought about it honestly, which was something she'd promised herself she'd do with this child after the conversation about the rifle. Safer than on the road, she said. Not what I'd call safe. What do we need to make it safe? Your father's lawyer needs to do some things. Your father's foreman needs to be warned. And eventually we need to get back to the ranch. And then what? And then there's a court, Clara said. And in the court your father tells the truth, and the people who saw what happened tell the truth, and the judge makes a ruling. What if the judge is Aunt Margaret's friend? Then we find a different judge. Can you do that? Your father's lawyer thinks so. What do you think? Clara looked down at her. The girl had a small piece of biscuit left and was holding it, not eating it yet, in the way of a child who has learned something about making things last. I think your father has been fighting this alone, Clara said. And lone fighters get tired, so I think it'll go better now than it did before. Lydia ate the last of the biscuit. Because of you, she said. Because there are more of us, Clara said. That's not the same thing. Lydia looked at her sideways, clearly not in complete agreement, and let it sit. Dr. Raines turned out to be a small man with large hands and the particular brisk unsentimentality of country doctors who have seen too much to waste time being gentle about delivering news. He looked at the leg, asked Ethan 3 questions, and then told Clara, not Ethan, which Clara noticed, that the bone itself was intact but the surrounding tissue was badly inflamed and the wound where the skin had torn needed cleaning that was going to be unpleasant, and that moving the patient again within 48 hours was his professional opinion a very bad idea. We may not have 48 hours, Clara said. Then the leg may not cooperate with whatever comes after, Raines said. He was already washing his hands. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what the leg is going to do. She went back in while the doctor worked and stood near the window in case she was needed, and because she didn't particularly want to be down on the street when she couldn't see who was on it. Ethan made the minimal sounds a man makes when he's decided not to make any. Aldridge sat at his desk and wrote 2 notes in a small, precise hand and folded them and wrote on the outside and set them face down. When Raines was done and the leg was wrapped and Ethan had the look of a man who'd been through something and was very carefully not showing it, Aldridge picked up both notes. Finn will go tonight, he said. 1 note to Dale Purcell, 1 to a colleague of mine in Bozeman who has been waiting for grounds to file a motion against Harlan Cruz. The events of the last 3 weeks may be sufficient grounds. What kind of motion? Clara asked. Conflict of interest, procedural misconduct. The specific flavor depends on what Purcell's testimony establishes. He looked at his notes. But if we can demonstrate that Margaret used intimidation to remove witnesses before a custody hearing and that she deployed armed men to take a child by force before the court had ruled, the conversation in September becomes very different. The judge is still Cruz, Ethan said. Not if my colleague in Bozeman does what I've asked. There's a circuit judge named Vance who covers 4 counties. He's clean as far as I know, which in this territory means nobody's found the right leverage yet. I want this case in front of Vance. He set the notes down. But that requires time. How much time? 3 weeks, possibly 4. Ethan was quiet. Clara could see him doing the arithmetic again. Again. September is 6 weeks, she said. That's inside the window. It's inside the window, Aldridge agreed. What isn't inside the window is you spending the next 6 weeks in Hardin. Cord knows you're in the county, and he'll work inward. Eventually, he'll work here. So we go to the ranch. If Dale Purcell can secure the North Road, yes. The ranch is defensible in a way that a lawyer's office above a hardware store isn't. He didn't say that last part with any self-pity, just with accuracy. You'd need to move in the next 2 days. The doctor said 48 hours. The doctor said moving in 48 hours is his professional opinion a bad idea. That's the same thing. It is not quite the same thing. Clara looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at the leg. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, which was that a ranch with 15 years of loyal employees and a fence road on the north pasture was a great deal more defensible than this, and that a man who could barely stand was a great deal less defensible than a man who could, and those two facts were in direct conflict. I'll make the decision in the morning, Ethan said. The morning is fine, Aldridge said, and picked up his pen again in a way that meant the meeting was done. They stayed that night above the hardware store, Lydia on the cot the moment she saw it because she was beyond caring about politeness, Ethan propped against the wall with his legs straight out, and Clara in the chair by the window with the rifle she'd stopped setting down any significant distance away. Aldridge had gone somewhere to sleep or to work. She wasn't certain which with him. She was watching the street when Ethan said, quietly enough not to wake Lydia, "You don't have to stay. We've talked about this. We've talked about the mountain and the road. We haven't talked about this." He meant the town, or the lawyer, or the part where it had become a legal proceeding. This isn't a dry creek bed, Clara. This is the kind of thing that follows people. If Margaret decides you're a complication, she'll decide I'm a complication whether I stay or go. I brought you off a mountain. She kept her eyes on the street. I'm already in it. That's not a reason to stay in it. No. She thought about Lydia on the cot, asleep with her mouth slightly open in the artless way of exhausted children. There are other reasons. He didn't push it, which she'd also started to understand about him. He asked the question once, clearly, and let the answer be what it was. It was a trait she respected and found somewhat maddening in equal measure. "What was your husband's name?" he said. She hadn't expected that. She looked away from the window for a moment. "Thomas." "And the baby?" "Rose. She was 6 days. Her voice came out as even as she could make it, which was fairly even after 3 years of practice. "I know that means some people think she barely, that it's not the same as—" "It's the same," Ethan said. "Nobody gets to measure somebody else's 6 days." Clara looked back at the street. "No," she said. "They don't." They were quiet for a while. A light went out in the saloon across the street. The dog she'd seen earlier was back, sitting in the middle of the road now, looking at something in the distance with the focused attention of a dog that has spotted something neither of them could see. "You should sleep," Ethan said. "In a while. I'll watch the street. You watch the camp." The camp I had 4 days of not sleeping to make up for. Tonight I'm only running about 3 days behind. Clara almost laughed. It came up on her without warning, the way it used to before Thomas, before Rose, before the 3 years of learning not to. A real laugh, short and a little rusty, like a door on— "Sorry," she said. "Don't apologize for that," Ethan said. And something in how he said it made her think it hadn't been a small thing for him to hear either, the laugh in the dark. In the morning, Aldridge confirmed that Finn had gone in the night. Ethan decided they would leave for the ranch that afternoon, against the doctor's opinion and in line with it. They gave him as close to 48 hours as they could manage by waiting until 3 o'clock. Raines came back, looked at the leg, said his piece again about the wisdom of movement, and left them to their choices. The ride to the Wilder Ranch was 9 hours by the North Road. They went through the afternoon and the evening and into the dark, stopping once at a creek to water the horse and rest the leg, and the land changed as they went south. Flatter, bigger, the kind of country that had a different feel to it than Clara's mountain valley, an openness that she simultaneously appreciated and found slightly overwhelming after years of living with hills on 3 sides. Lydia fell asleep against Clara's arm during the last 2 hours. Clara didn't move her. She held the reins with her left hand and kept her right arm where it was, and watched the dark road and listened to the night sounds, which were different here than at her cabin, more wind and less rock. Around midnight, Ethan said quietly, "The gate." She saw it. A wooden arch with the brand burned into the crossbar. And on the left side, 50 feet back from the arch, the orange dot of a cigarette coal. "That Margaret's man?" she said just as quietly. "Can't see which one." She thought about it, stopped the horse. "If we go through, he reports to her." "Yes." "The fence road." "Half a mile back." She turned the horse without another word, and they went back along the fence line, and Ethan found the gap in the dark by instinct or memory, and they came through onto the pasture grass and around the back of the dark barn and into the ranch yard from the north. There was a light in the bunkhouse. There was another light in the main house, upstairs. Someone had been watching for them. The bunkhouse door opened while they were still 50 feet out, and a man stood in the light with his thumbs in his belt and looked at them for one long moment. "Dale," Ethan said. The man came off the step at a walk that wanted to be faster and stopped himself being faster out of some private discipline. "3 weeks you've been gone," Dale Purcell said. His voice was the voice of a man who has been very controlled for a long time and is working at continuing to be controlled. He was 60-something, solid, with the permanent squint of a man who spent his life reading distances. 3 weeks, Ethan. I know. The girl? Here." Ethan looked back. Lydia had woken when the horse stopped, and she was sitting up looking at Dale Purcell with recognition and something that was close to relief. "Hey, Dale," she said. Purcell's controlled face cracked down the middle. "Hey yourself," he said. His voice had gone rough. He cleared his throat. "We're going to get you inside. Finn came this morning." He looked at Clara then, measuring her the way men in this country measured strangers. Not rudely, just comprehensively. "Ma'am." "Clara Voss," she said. "I know who you are. Finn told me." He looked at Ethan. "She brought you off the mountain." "She found us first." He looked at her again. "I'll get 2 men to swap out on the gate watch. There's been somebody there since the 2nd week. She's not subtle." "She doesn't need to be," Ethan said. "What's the word from Bozeman?" "Nothing yet?" "By week's end," Aldridge said in the note. Purcell reached up and took hold of Ethan's arm as he tried to get down. "Easy, easy now. I can see what that leg looks like from here. Let me." "I'm fine." "You are not fine. Don't start with me tonight. I've been sleeping in my boots for 3 weeks, and I'm not in the mood." He got under Ethan's arm with the ease of a man who'd done similar things before. "Come on. Cook has had the stove going since Finn got here. She seems to think you'll be hungry." "I am hungry," Lydia said. "I imagine you are." Purcell looked over at her, and the ruinous thing happened to his face again. "Come on then. Your room's the same. I had Josie air the bedding." They went toward the house. Clara hung back to take care of the horse, which was what you did after a long ride, and also, she realized, what you did when you weren't sure whether you went through the front door or not. She'd been making decisions at speed for 6 days now, just the next thing and the next thing, and it had been all right because the next thing had always been obvious. She stood in the dark barn with Dolph Prentice's good horse, and she looked at the house with its lit windows and its wide porch and its size. It was bigger than she'd built in her mind, even knowing the numbers. A working house, but a substantial one. The kind of house that has rooms for things. And for the first time she wondered what exactly she was in it. She was unsaddling the horse when she heard the step. "There's a room," Purcell said from the barn door. "Nothing fancy. First door on the right upstairs. Cook says, come eat first." "I was going to sleep in here," Clara said. Not seriously, just an honest statement of where her head was. "I know," he said. "But you're not going to." "Mr. Purcell." "Dale." "Dale. I want to understand what I am here before I go through that door." The old man was quiet for a moment. He came into the barn far enough to lean on a post, arms folded, looking at her with the squint that was just his resting expression. "What you are," he said, "is the woman who found that man in a dry creek bed and gave him her last water and then held a door shut against the people trying to take his daughter." He tilted his head. "What else do you need to be?" Clara smoothed the horse's flank. "I don't want charity. Nobody's offering any. I don't want to be a guest who doesn't know when to leave." "Nobody said anything about leaving." He straightened up. "You want to know what I see, Mrs. Voss? I see a woman who's been making every decision for 6 days straight and kept 2 people alive doing it, and she's standing in a barn talking herself out of a hot meal and a bed." He turned toward the door. "Your call." But the stove's going. Clara put the brush down. She followed him out of the barn and across the yard and up the porch steps and through the front door of a house she'd never imagined walking into, in a life she'd been fairly certain was finished with surprising her. The kitchen was warm and smelled like coffee and something with onions in it, and Lydia was already at the table with a bowl in front of her, and Ethan was in a chair with his leg up on a second chair looking slightly less gray than he had for days, and the cook, a broad woman named Harriet, who looked at Clara with the assessing eye of someone who has run a household a long time and knows exactly what she's looking at, put a bowl down at the empty place without asking. Lydia looked up from her food. "I saved you a seat," she said. Clara sat down. She picked up the spoon and ate, and the food was plain and hot and real. And the light in the kitchen was steady. And outside somewhere a man was at the gate watching for them. And in Bozeman, a motion was being filed. And in 3 weeks or 4, a different judge would be deciding the future of the child eating across the table. None of that was finished, not one piece of it. But she picked up the spoon and she ate. The ranch settled into something like a routine in the days after they arrived, the way places do when people inside them are waiting for something they can't control and need to stay busy or go mad. Ethan's leg kept him off it, which kept him inside, which drove him in a slow and mostly silent way absolutely out of his mind. Clara watched him the way she'd watched a trapped animal once, a hawk that had come through a window in her first winter at the cabin, beating itself against the walls until she'd gotten a coat over it and carried it out, with the same mixture of patience and the knowledge that you couldn't explain to the thing that it needed to hold still. He managed the ranch from the kitchen table. Dale brought him reports morning and evening. The men rotated gate watch in shifts of 4 hours because anything longer and a man started letting his attention drift. And attention was what they had instead of certainty. The man Margaret had posted at the gate, a lean, weathered type who gave his name to nobody and answered to a hand signal from the road, was still there every morning, steady as a fence post. "She's waiting," Dale said on the 4th morning. "For what?" "For you to make a mistake or for the court date. Whichever comes first." He set the report on the table. "She's also been to see 3 families in the South Valley, telling them you've been absent, the ranch is poorly managed, she's concerned about the child's welfare." Ethan's hand went flat on the table. "She's building public testimony," Clara said from the stove, where she'd taken over coffee duty because Harriet had enough to manage, and Clara needed something to do with her hands in the mornings. Before the hearing, she wants the judge to walk in already having heard the story her way. Both men looked at her. "That's exactly what she's doing," Aldridge said from the doorway. He'd ridden out from Hardin 2 days prior and installed himself in the spare room because the relevant documents were here, and also because he was the kind of lawyer who preferred to be where the problem was. He came to the table and set down a letter. "And it's working, to a degree. I've heard from Bozeman. The motion to replace Cruz was filed last Thursday. The response from Cruz's office came back yesterday." He slid the letter across to Ethan. Ethan read it. His face did the thing it did. "He denied the motion," Ethan said. "He denied the motion," Aldridge confirmed, "on the grounds that no procedural misconduct has been formally demonstrated and the hearing proceeds as scheduled." He sat down. "However, the filing itself is now part of the public record. That changes the hearing's character. Cruz can't ignore the appearance of conflict the way he could before someone formally named it." "So he's still the judge, but he's embarrassed," Clara said. "He's constrained," Aldridge said, "which is as good as embarrassed in a courtroom." "What about Vance?" "Vance has agreed to review the case file. That's not the same as taking jurisdiction, but it's not nothing." Dale Purcell drank his coffee. He had the manner of a man listening to a foreign language he'd learned enough of to get the general meaning without the details. "What do we need from our end?" "My testimony," Ethan said. "Dale's testimony. And something demonstrating that Cord's activities were directed by Margaret, not just incidental." "The Dennison boy," Clara said. Everyone looked at her. "The boy who brought the note to my cabin. He's 12, 13. He said a man on the road gave him 50 cents to bring it." She looked at Aldridge. "He saw the man's face. He took his money and he saw his face. If Cord was that man, that's Margaret's instruction delivered by Margaret's employee." Aldridge was already writing. "Where does the Dennison boy live?" "Down valley from my cabin, the farm near the South Fork." She paused. "His people aren't going to want trouble." Most people don't. He kept writing. Most people also don't like knowing they were used to threaten a woman alone in a cabin. He looked up. I'll ride there myself. People respond better to a face than a letter. Clara nodded. She poured herself coffee and stood by the window and looked out at the yard, where two of the hands were working on a fence section that didn't particularly need working on but gave them something to do while they watched the gate road. She understood the impulse. The week moved the way weeks move when you're inside something unresolved. Slowly during the days, fast in retrospect. Lydia had returned to a version of her regular life with the totality that children manage when they feel safe. She was everywhere on the ranch, in the barn with the men, in the kitchen with Harriet, trailing Dale Purcell on his rounds with the focused devotion of a child who had decided he was the most interesting person on the property, which Dale bore with gruff dignity. She came to Clara in the evenings. That had started on the second night without anyone planning it. Clara had been sitting on the porch in the cooling dark, doing nothing useful, just sitting, and Lydia had come out with a blanket and sat beside her with the blanket half over both of them and said nothing for almost 20 minutes, which was a long time for Lydia. Then she'd said, "What was your cabin like?" And Clara had told her. The well, the garden, the window that faced the mountain, the hawk that came through the glass that first winter, the way the snow came off the peak in certain conditions and made a sound like a long breath. "Do you miss it?" Lydia asked. Clara thought about it honestly. "Parts of it," she said, "the quiet sometimes. But quiet and lonely feel the same after a while, and it's hard to miss one without the other following it in." "Papa gets lonely," Lydia said. "He doesn't say so." "I know. He talks more with you." Clara looked out at the dark yard. "Does that bother you?" Lydia thought about it with the seriousness she brought to most things. "No," she said. "It's like, before he talked to Dale about ranch things, and to me about me things, and there wasn't a middle." She pulled the blanket straighter. "You're the middle." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything, which was sometimes the best answer. Ethan was on his feet by the end of the first week, against Raines's written advisement delivered via Aldridge, who had shaken his head while delivering it. Not good feet. He was using a stick Dale found somewhere and walking with the careful deliberateness of a man testing ice, but feet. He came out to the porch the first morning he could manage it and stood looking at the ranch yard with an expression Clara had not seen on him before, something unguarded that went away when he noticed her noticing it. "Don't say it," he said. "I wasn't going to say anything. You had a look." "I have a face. The look comes with it." He almost smiled. He was getting better at that. The almost smiles had been getting closer to actual since the kitchen that first night, and Clara had stopped tracking them consciously because tracking them seemed like the kind of thing you shouldn't do. "Aldridge thinks the hearing is going to come down to character," he said. "Mine against the picture she's been painting. Then character is what we bring. She's been painting for 3 years, Clara. I've been running from her for 3 weeks." He looked at the gate road. "That's a lot of canvas." "You have Dale. You have the Dennison boy if Aldridge gets him." She leaned on the porch rail. "You have me." He looked at her sideways. "In what capacity?" he said. It wasn't a loaded question. He asked it straight, the way he asked most things, which she'd learned was his nature and not an absence of diplomacy. "In the capacity of a person who found you in a dry creek bed and can describe in some detail what a man looks like who is going to any length to get his child to safety." She looked back at him. "What a man does when he has nothing left tells you more about him than what he does when he has everything. I can say that." Ethan was quiet a moment. "Aldridge says the courtroom is going to be a problem. Margaret will bring people. Her lawyer is a man named Forsyth, who is very good at making witnesses feel small." "I felt small before. It passes." "He'll question your connection to this family. He'll suggest motives. He can suggest what he likes. He'll say—" Ethan stopped. He turned the stick once under his hand. "He'll say that a widow woman living alone with nothing and nobody attaching herself to a wealthy man's situation has obvious reasons that aren't about the child's welfare." The air was cool and still. In the distance, a horse moved in the paddock, its hooves quiet on the dry ground. "Let him say it," Clara said. "What's true is true. People in a room can generally tell." "Not always." "No, not always." She turned from the rail. But I'm not going to sit at your cabin table deciding what's too risky before anything's happened. If it happens, we deal with it. That's how we got here." He looked at her for a long moment with that expression that had something behind it she didn't try to name. "That is how we got here," he said. The word from Bozeman came on a Thursday, 9 days before the hearing. Aldridge came down the stairs with a wire in his hand and the controlled face that Clara had started reading the way she read weather. The stillness meant he was deciding how to say something before he said it. "Vance," he said. Ethan looked up from the table. "He's reviewing as of yesterday. Crew's office filed an objection this morning, which Vance's clerk returned unopened." Aldridge set the wire down. "Cruz is off the case. Vance takes the hearing on the 14th. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Dale Purcell set his cup down very deliberately. "Well," he said. "The 14th, Ethan said. "That's still 9 days. 9 days is enough. The evidence we have goes to Vance's clerk tomorrow." Aldridge sat down. "This changes the shape of the hearing substantially. Vance doesn't know Margaret. He has no history with her, no dinners, no loyalty to maintain. He'll rule on what's presented." "Then we need to present it well," Clara said. "We do." Aldridge looked at her. "I want to prepare your testimony this week, both of you separately, then together for consistency. What you say and what he says need to fit the same story because they are the same story." "They are," Clara said. "That makes it easier." "It does. Forsyth will look for gaps anyway. He's good at gaps." "How good?" Aldridge considered. "He got a man acquitted of cattle theft in '91 based on 12 minutes of discrepancy in 2 witnesses' timelines. He's meticulous, and he's patient, and he has the courtroom manner of a disappointed schoolteacher, which makes witnesses feel like they've done something wrong even when they haven't." He folded his hands. "I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you so you're not surprised on the day." Clara thought of the Dennison boy. 12 years old, 50 cents in his pocket, a face he'd seen on a road. A disappointed schoolteacher tone could do a great deal with a 12-year-old. "The Dennison boy," she said. "I spoke with his father. The father needs convincing. I have another meeting there on Monday." "Can I come?" Aldridge looked at her. "Do you know these people?" "I know the valley. His father was at the winter gathering in November, and I was there, and we spoke. Not much, but enough." She looked at Ethan. "A lawyer from Hardin riding up a farm road is one thing. A neighbor is another." "Go with him," Ethan said. Aldridge didn't look entirely comfortable with this, but he was a man who valued results over process. Monday then, early. The preparation sessions were the week's other work. Aldridge sat with Clara for 3 hours on a Tuesday afternoon in the good parlor that nobody normally used, asking her the same questions different ways in Forsyth's voice as he imagined it, and Clara answered them, and he told her where she was convincing and where she was less so, and it was an uncomfortable exercise and a useful one. When he asks about your circumstances, "My poverty, you mean?" "Your circumstances." Don't say poverty. Don't say anything that frames yourself as desperate. "I'm not going to lie about the state of my well." "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you not to frame it as desperation." There's a difference between a woman who is surviving hard circumstances with competence and a woman who is desperate. One of them is sympathetic, and one of them looks like motive. Clara sat with that. "You're right," she said. "I don't like it, but you're right." "Also, Aldridge set his pen down. "He will ask about your relationship to Ethan. He'll do it sideways, which is worse than direct. He'll ask how many nights you spent on the road together. He'll ask about sleeping arrangements in a tone that implies something without saying it. The answer to both is what happened. Lydia was between us most nights." "That's the answer, yes. Say it matter-of-factly. Don't explain more than you're asked." He looked at her steadily. "The appearance of intimacy is something Forsyth will use to imply you have an interest in this case beyond what you've stated. He may try to make it look as if you and Ethan arranged things, the testimony, your presence at the ranch, to create an impression favorable to custody." "That's absurd." "It's what he'll suggest. The man was in a dry creek bed." "Yes. And you need to be able to say that with exactly the steadiness you just showed me. Not defensiveness, not outrage, just the plain fact." Aldridge picked his pen back up. "The outrage is understandable. The outrage helps her." Clara breathed once, slow. "Fine," she said. Monday she rode with Aldrich to the Dennison farm and sat at the kitchen table with the father, a careful man named Walt Dennison, who had the look of someone who had been worrying about this conversation since Aldrich's first visit, and let Aldrich do the legal talking. And then when Walt Dennison looked at her with the particular anxiety of a man trying to decide whether the right thing was worth the cost to his family, she said simply, "I was alone in that cabin, Walt. Your boy rode up there and gave me that note, and what it said was that people were looking for a little girl, and they weren't asking nice. You've got a daughter of your own." Walt Dennison looked at his hands. "Boy doesn't have to be in the courtroom," he said to Aldrich. "He can give a sworn statement to my office. I'll be asking him questions in writing with you present. Forsyth can challenge the statement, but he can't cross-examine a written statement the same way." Aldrich was careful and precise. "Your son's face doesn't have to be in that room." The father was quiet a long time. "All right," he said. Coming back, Aldrich said, "That was well done. I just said what was true. Most people can't manage that without editorializing." "I've had practice," she said, and didn't explain it further, and Aldrich didn't ask. The thing with Margaret happened 4 days before the hearing, and Clara would think afterward that she should have expected it, but the truth was she'd been so focused on Vance and Forsyth in the courtroom that the ranch gate had slipped to the back of her attention, which was exactly what Margaret had waited for. It was mid-afternoon. Dale was in the north pasture. Ethan was inside with Aldrich going over the final testimony. Lydia was in the barn with Harriet's daughter, doing whatever Lydia did in barns, which was generally everything she was and wasn't supposed to do. Clara was on the porch going through Aldrich's notes for the third time when she heard the gate. Not the rattle of someone checking it, the sound of it opening. She was on her feet before she'd decided to stand. 3 horses coming up the ranch road at a walk, which was worse than a trot somehow. The deliberate pace of people who weren't uncertain about arriving. In front on a dark horse was a woman Clara had never seen but knew immediately, the way you know a thing you've been told enough about. Margaret Vale was 50 or thereabouts, well-dressed in the particular way of a woman who uses clothing as an argument, everything precise and considered and expensive enough to make a point. She rode well. She had the bearing of someone who had not spent a significant portion of her life worrying about whether she was welcome places. Behind her, on the gray horse Ethan had named from the ridge, was Cord. And behind Cord was a man with a leather satchel across his saddle that looked like it had papers in it. Clara did not go inside. She stood on the porch where she was and waited. Margaret stopped her horse at the foot of the porch steps and looked at Clara with the frank, measuring look of a woman who had been told about her and was now comparing the description to the original. "You must be Mrs. Voss," she said. Her voice was pleasant. That was the thing Clara hadn't expected. It was a genuinely pleasant voice, warm even, the voice of a woman who had spent decades being convincing. "I understand you've been very helpful to my brother-in-law." "I can get Ethan if you want to speak with him," Clara said. "Actually," Margaret smiled, "I came to speak with you. I'm not sure we have anything to discuss." "I think we might." Margaret swung down from the horse in a single practiced movement, handed the reins to Cord, and came up the 2 porch steps as though she'd been doing it all her life. She stopped just inside comfortable speaking distance, which put her closer than Clara wanted her. "I know how this looks, Mrs. Voss. I know what Ethan has told you about me. I want you to understand there's another side to it. There usually is. Caroline was my sister." The warmth in her voice deepened into something that was either real grief or a very good replica of it. "She was the best person I have ever known, and she died and left a little girl alone with a man who cannot—" She stopped, pressed her lips together briefly. "Ethan Wilder is not a bad man. I want you to hear me say that. But he is a man who is trying to raise a daughter while running 60,000 acres, and something is going to give, and what gives is going to be Lydia." "Lydia seems all right to me." "She does now, because you're here." And here Margaret's eyes did something that Clara watched carefully. They went genuine for a moment, or something that felt genuine, something that wasn't the court voice or the argument voice. "You've been good for her, I can see that from what I've heard. You're a capable woman, and you clearly care about her, and I don't think you're a fool." Clara said nothing. "What I'm asking," Margaret said, "is whether a woman as capable as you looks at this situation clearly. Whether she sees that going into that courtroom is not That what happens in that room isn't going to be clean or fast or painless for you or for Ethan or for Lydia. She paused. My offer to Ethan has always included visitation, real, regular visitation. Summers, holidays. He would see his daughter. Under your supervision. Under a court-ordered agreement that you'd control. Something flickered behind Margaret's pleasant eyes. I would provide stability, education, everything my sister would have wanted. I found that man in a creek bed, Clara said, crawling. His leg was broken and he hadn't eaten in 4 days. The only thing he was doing, the only thing, from what I could see, was getting to his daughter. She looked at Margaret straight. A man like that doesn't need managing. He needs to be left alone to be her father. Margaret's mouth pressed together. The pleasantness thinned. You're not his wife, she said. No. You're not family. No. Then on what authority exactly? I don't have authority. Clara held her eyes. I'm just a woman who was there when you weren't, and I'll say so in that courtroom in 4 days. The two women looked at each other. Clara could hear Cord's horse shifting its weight behind Margaret, the creak of leather. From inside the house she could hear nothing, and hoped it stayed that way. Mrs. Voss. Margaret's voice had dropped the warmth entirely. What was under it was not ugly exactly, but it was hard, the voice of a woman accustomed to prevailing. I want you to think very carefully about what you are committing to here. You are a woman with nothing, and I say that without cruelty. I say it as a fact. No property to speak of, no family, no standing in this county or any other. When this hearing is done, whatever the result, Ethan Wilder will go back to his life, and you will go back to... She glanced toward the valley. Whatever that was. Clara let that sit in the air between them. Then I don't have much to lose, she said. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned and went down the steps and took her horse's reins from Cord and mounted in the same practiced way she'd dismounted and looked back once. I'll see you in Bozeman, she said. I'll be there, Clara said. She watched them go back down the ranch road and through the gate, and Cord closed it behind them, and she stood on the porch until the sound of hooves was gone. Ethan came out the door behind her. He'd heard, or most of it. How long were you standing there? She said without turning. Long enough. I meant to keep her talking. I know. He came up beside her at the rail. He was using the stick less today, she noticed. She doesn't offer anything she means to keep. I know that too. She shook you, he said. Not unkindly. A little. No point denying it. She's not wrong that I don't have standing. You have standing with me. That's not the same as standing in a court, Ethan. He was quiet a moment. Then he said, Aldridge told me something 2 days ago. He said the most dangerous thing Forsyth is going to do is make us look like two separate people with two separate interests. He said the best thing we could do was make it harder to separate us. Clara looked at him. He was looking at the gate road, not at her. He had the careful sideways posture of a man who has worked out what he's going to say and is still not sure he should say it. There's a way, he said, to formalize your standing, legally, before the hearing. She understood what he was saying before he said it. She understood it the way you understand a thing you've been not thinking about clearly enough that when it's finally said, it doesn't surprise you. Ethan. I know it isn't... He stopped, started again. I know it isn't what either of us would have drawn up on paper. I know it's fast. I know what it looks like from the outside. He finally looked at her. But you are already here, Clara. You're already in it. And Margaret wasn't wrong that when the dust settles, you go back to whatever you had before, which is not... He pressed his lips together. You saved my daughter's life. You gave us your last water, and I have been sitting here watching you prepare for a courtroom fight that isn't yours and thinking about what happens to you after, and I can't get comfortable with what I see. Clara looked out at the ranch, the yard, the barn, the paddock with the horses, the mountains to the north that she knew the backside of now, the gate at the end of the road. You're not asking me because you want to, she said. You're asking me because it's the right thing, and that's different. It doesn't have to be. She looked at him. What I'm saying, he said, and his voice had gone quieter, is that I am asking you for a reason that started as practical, and somewhere in 3 weeks stopped being only practical, and I don't know what to do with that except say it. He held her gaze. I'm not asking you to pretend. I'm not asking you to perform something for a courtroom. I'm asking if you would consider whether this—" He gestured with one hand between them and at the house and the yard in a way that was slightly helpless and very unlike the controlled man she'd been watching all week. "Whether any of this is something you want." Clara was quiet a long time. Inside the house, somewhere, she heard Lydia laugh at something Harriet said, the bright, uncomplicated laugh of a child who felt safe enough to laugh. She had not heard Lydia laugh like that in the dry creek bed, or on the mountain, or in Hardin, or on the night road to the ranch. She had heard it the second morning at the kitchen table, and she had noticed it and set it somewhere inside herself the way you set something down that you mean to come back to. She had come back to it often. "Lydia told me I'm the middle," she said. Ethan blinked. "What?" "She said before you talked to Dale about ranch things, and to her about her things, and there was no middle. She said, I'm the middle." Clara looked at her hands on the rail. "I thought about that for a while." "And?" "And I think a person could do worse than being the middle." She looked up at him. "But I want to be clear about something. When I say yes, I'm not saying it because it helps the hearing, or because of what Margaret said, or because of the 60,000 acres. I'm saying it because of what I actually know of you, which is who you are when you have nothing left. And that's—" She stopped. "That's the only information about a person that matters." Ethan looked at her. "Is that a yes?" he said. "That's a yes," she said. He didn't say anything immediately. He just stood there next to her at the rail, looking out at the ranch with the stick loose in one hand, and something in his shoulders that had been held tight for 3 years, or maybe longer, went fractionally less tight. "Aldridge will need to file before the hearing," he said finally. "Then you'd better go tell him." "I will." He didn't move yet. "Clara." "Hmm?" "Thank you." And before she could say what she'd said that first night in the cabin, "Don't," he added, "for this specifically, not for the water or the mountain or the road, for this." She looked at him a moment. "Go tell Aldridge," she said. He went inside. She stayed on the porch. The gate road was empty and still. The mountains stood where they had been. The day moved on the way days do, indifferent to the decisions made inside them. Clara Voss stood in the afternoon light on the porch of the Wilder Ranch and felt the shape of the next thing, and the next thing after that, and found she could see them more clearly than she'd seen anything in 3 years. And that was a strange feeling. Not comfortable, not simple, but real, which was what she'd been short of for longer than she could accurately say. Inside, she heard Ethan say Aldridge's name, and then Lydia's voice asking what was happening, and then Dale Purcell saying something in his low particular rumble, and then Harriet's laugh, which was a bigger, rounder version of Lydia's. The door was still open behind her. She turned and went back through it. Aldridge filed the marriage certificate with the county clerk in Bozeman 2 days before the hearing, which gave Forsyth exactly 48 hours to work with it. And the first thing Forsyth did was try to have it thrown out on grounds of procedural irregularity. And the second thing Judge Vance did was deny that motion in about 4 minutes, which Aldridge said afterward was a good sign about how the week was going to go. Clara heard this secondhand sitting in the ranch kitchen with her hands around a cup she wasn't drinking from because she hadn't gone to Bozeman for the filing. Ethan had asked if she wanted to, and she'd said no, and he hadn't pushed it. The filing was a legal act. The piece of paper was a legal piece of paper. What it meant between two people was a separate thing that lived in a different place than a county clerk's office, and she needed to keep those two things in separate rooms in her head, or she was going to be useless in the courtroom, which she could not afford to be. The wedding itself had been the evening before the filing, in the good parlor that nobody normally used, with Aldridge as witness, and Dale Purcell standing in the doorway looking like a man attending something he hadn't been fully prepared for emotionally and was managing by being very interested in a point on the far wall. Harriet had put flowers on the table from somewhere, which Clara had not asked about because some kindnesses you just take. It had taken 11 minutes. Ethan had held her hand, and his hand was dry and steady, and she'd noticed that and been grateful for it. He'd said the words in a quiet, even voice, looking at her directly. She'd said them back the same way. Lydia had been standing beside Harriet, and when it was done, she'd come directly to Clara and put both arms around her middle without a word, just held on, and Clara had put one hand on the back of her head and looked at the flowers on the table and breathed. After, Ethan had said very quietly, just to her, "We'll figure out the rest of it, when the rest of it is all that's left to figure out." Yes, she'd said. We will. That was all that needed saying that night. The morning of the hearing, Bozeman was already loud by the time they arrived. Not the kind of loud a city is, but it wasn't much of a city, but the particular loud of a place where people have gathered around something, the low-grade noise of people who know something is happening and want to be near it. The courtroom was on the second floor of the county building, a room with high windows and benches that were already full when they walked in, which told Clara that Margaret had done her preparatory work here too, filling the room with faces that would register the right reactions at the right moments. Margaret was already seated at the plaintiff's table with Forsyth beside her. He was a compact man with a neat gray beard and the settled, unhurried manner of someone who has been the most prepared person in the room so many times it no longer feels like an achievement. He looked at Clara when she came in, and his face registered her with the same professional neutrality that he probably applied to everything, and she looked back and held it until he looked away, which took about 3 seconds. Margaret looked at her too. Different. Margaret's look had something in it that Clara recognized from the porch. That genuine thing underneath the armor, the grief and the anger all braided together. It didn't make Clara like her. It made her understand her, which was a harder feeling to sit with. Judge Vance was younger than she'd expected. Late 40s, lean, with the focused, slightly tired look of a man who covered 4 counties and had seen a great many hearings and had opinions about having his time wasted. He called the room to order without ceremony and looked at both tables with equal impatience, which Clara took as the good sign Aldridge had predicted. Forsyth opened. He was as good as Aldridge had said. He had a way of speaking that sounded like reason itself, measured, almost gentle, as if he were simply helping the court understand something anyone would see if they looked clearly. He described Ethan's absences from the ranch. He described the incident with the fence and the horse and Lydia's arm, with a medical record Clara had not known existed. He described, with apparent reluctance, the matter of Ethan's flight from the county with his daughter, which Forsyth framed not as a father protecting his child from armed men, but as a man so unstable under pressure that he had taken a child into 90 miles of waterless country rather than submit to a lawful evaluation. 90 miles of waterless country, he said twice. Once for the court and once for the benches. Aldridge was measured and precise in return. He laid out the timeline. He established Cord's presence and employment. He introduced Walt Dennison's written statement, which Forsyth objected to on hearsay grounds, and Vance overruled it with the expression of a man who had heard that objection before. He introduced the note that had been sent to Clara's cabin, which was a piece of paper with words on it that were difficult to characterize as anything other than a threat. He introduced Dale Purcell. Dale was better on the stand than Clara had expected, which probably meant she'd underestimated him, which probably meant she'd made the same mistake a lot of people made with quiet men. He answered Aldridge's questions in the flat, particular way of someone describing things they saw, not things they felt, and the specificity of it landed differently than emotion would have. He named the men who had come to the porch in July. He named what they said. He named what Cord had said on the 3rd visit, the one where the words had been clearest. The girl had to be found, not the man. Forsyth cross-examined him with the disappointed schoolteacher tone Aldridge had described, and it did what Aldridge had said it did. It made the air in the room feel slightly like something had been done wrong. But Dale Purcell had been alive 60-some years and was not a man who mistook atmosphere for fact, and he answered every question with the same flat precision until Forsyth set him down. Then Aldridge called Ethan. Ethan walked to the stand without the stick. He'd been walking without it for 2 days, which Clara knew had cost him something because she could see how he held the leg when he thought no one was watching. He sat down and looked at Vance briefly, acknowledging the court, and then he looked at Aldridge and waited. Aldridge took him through it carefully. The marriage to Caroline, her death, the years after, the ranch, Lydia, the routine of a life built around a child and a working property. Clara listened to it and heard the shape of a life she'd only had pieces of before, the day-to-day of it, and it was not a perfect life, and Aldridge did not try to make it one. Ethan had been absent sometimes. He had been tired. He had made decisions about the ranch that he had to reverse. He had missed a school event in May because of a cattle emergency, and Lydia had been upset, and he had not handled the conversation after as well as he might have. Aldridge put all of it in because Forsyth would put it in otherwise, And what the court saw was a man who could account for his failures the same way he accounted for his facts. Then Aldridge asked him about July, about the men on the porch, about the decision to run. Ethan said, "A man with a badge at my door, I open the door. A court summons served proper, I comply. 3 men who work for Margaret Vale telling me the girl has to be found, not the man." He paused. "I took my daughter and I left. I'd do it again." "Why not go to the authorities?" The judge overseeing the custody evaluation had been to dinner at Margaret Vale's house 11 times in 2 years. I didn't know yet who else she'd reached. When you don't know who's safe, you move. And your destination? James Aldridge, in Hardin. The only lawyer I knew for certain was outside her reach. You never arrived in Hardin. No. Ethan's voice went level in the way it went level when he was going through something that cost him. My horse was shot out from under me on the Yellowstone cutoff. Lydia and I were on foot in August. No water, no shelter. He looked at his hands once and back up. I don't know, if I'm honest, exactly how many days we were out there. Maybe 4, maybe 5. I lost track of what day it was, somewhere in the second one. And then? A woman found us. He looked at Clara. He didn't look at the courtroom, at Margaret, at the gallery. He looked at Clara. She had maybe a cup of water left in her canteen, and she gave it to my daughter. She carried Lydia 3/4 of a mile uphill in that heat. Then she went back and helped me. He was quiet a moment. She had nothing. She gave everything she had to people she didn't know because a child was dying in front of her. I don't know how you put that in legal language, but that's what happened. Forsyth cross-examined him for 40 minutes. He was methodical and patient, and he found every gap he could find. The fence incident, the missed school event, the credibility of a man who had fled a legal proceeding. And he filled those gaps with implication the way you fill a wall with mortar, careful and complete. Clara watched Ethan answer and watched him hold and watched him once when Forsyth suggested that the flight from the ranch had demonstrated an unfitness rather than a fatherly protectiveness. Go very still in the way he went still when he was controlling something. You ran, Forsyth said, when the legal process could have protected you. The legal process, Ethan said, was overseen by a judge who has since been removed from the case for conflict of interest. Forsyth moved on without acknowledging that. Clara noted that the gallery had. Then Aldridge called Clara. She had been sitting with this moment for 10 days, and she walked to the stand now and sat down and looked at Aldridge and waited, the same way Ethan had, and the thing she had been afraid of, that when the room looked at her, she would feel like what Margaret had described on the porch. Nothing, no standing, no property, no name in this county or any other. That thing did not happen. Or it happened, and she sat in it and the floor held anyway, which she supposed was the same result. Aldridge walked her through it. The cabin. The drought. The morning she heard the cry and took the rifle down off the pegs. He did not romanticize it. He asked her to describe what she saw in the creek bed, and she described it, and the room was quiet. What did you see when you looked at the man? I saw a man who was still moving toward his daughter when he had nothing left to move with. And what did you do? I gave them the water I had. Then I got the child back to my cabin. Why? Clara looked at him. Because she was dying and I could help. It cost you your remaining water supply. Yes. You had almost nothing yourself. I had enough to make a choice. Aldridge moved on. He brought her through the cabin days, through the note and the Dennison boy, through the mountain and the high road, and Hardin and the ranch. He brought her to the porch and Margaret's visit, and he asked her to describe what Margaret had said, and she described it with the same flat accuracy Dale Purcell had used on the stand, not performing outrage, just the words. She said that when the hearing was done, Ethan Wilder would go back to his life, and I would go back to whatever I had before, Claire said. And how did you respond? I said I didn't have much to lose, and then I told her I'd be in Bozeman. Are you here because you have nothing to lose, Mrs. Wilder? The name landed in the room. Clara saw 2 people in the gallery react to it, 2 women who had been sent by Margaret, she guessed, by their expressions. She looked at Aldridge. No, she said. I'm here because I know what I saw. And what I saw was a father who gave everything he had for his daughter, and a daughter who thrives when she's with him. And I think those are the things that matter in a room like this. Forsyth came at her the way Aldridge had said he would. He started sideways, which was worse. He asked how many nights they had been on the road together. He asked about sleeping arrangements at the cabin. He asked, with the air of a man just trying to be thorough, how it was that a woman alone with no property and no income had come to marry a man of Ethan Wilder's circumstances inside of 3 weeks of making his acquaintance. Clara sat in the disappointed schoolteacher tone and let it do what it was going to do, and then she said, "Mr. Forsyth, the man I married was on my floor with a broken leg and his daughter was unconscious on my bed. If I had an eye toward his circumstances, I was looking at the wrong things." A sound moved through the gallery. Not laughter, exactly. Something warmer and less polite than laughter. Forsyth pressed. He was too good to let a gallery reaction stop him. He suggested that Clara's testimony was colored by her new position. He suggested that a woman who had gone from a failing homestead to the Wilder Ranch in 3 weeks had obvious motivations for the story she was telling. He asked whether she had been aware of Ethan Wilder's net worth before the marriage. "I knew he ran 12,000 head, Clara said. "I found that out about a week in. By that point, I'd already given him my last water, dragged him across my cabin floor, borrowed a horse on his behalf, and helped him evade armed men on a mountain road. The money didn't change what I'd already done, and it didn't change why I did it." "And why did you do it?" "Because it was what needed doing, and because—" She stopped for a moment. She hadn't planned this, and she knew Aldridge would probably wince at the unplanned moment, but it was true, and she was tired of the half-truth. "Because I'd been living alone for 3 years waiting for something to make a decision for me, and that little girl was dying in a dry creek bed, and that was sufficient reason to stop waiting." Forsyth looked at her for a moment. He had the expression of a man who has just encountered something that doesn't fit the shape he built for it. He let her go. Aldridge called no further witnesses. He didn't need to. He made his closing argument in the quiet, direct way he did everything, naming the facts without embroidery. Armed men sent before a legal ruling, a witness intimidation, a judge removed for conflict, a father who had protected his child at personal cost, and a child who was, by every account, healthy, happy, and secure in her father's household. Forsyth's closing was longer and less convincing than his examination, which Clara took as a sign that the examination hadn't done what he'd needed it to. Vance took 40 minutes. 40 minutes was shorter than Clara had expected, and she spent them in the hallway outside the courtroom because she couldn't sit still in a bench, and Ethan sat beside her on the hallway floor with his back against the wall and his legs straight out, and Lydia, who had been kept at the ranch by Dale's stern instruction and had arrived in Bozeman anyway sometime during Ethan's testimony because she was Lydia, sat on Clara's other side eating an apple Harriet had packed for her with the unhurried composure of a child who had decided to be calm and was going to hold that position. "How do you think it went?" Lydia asked. "Good," Ethan said. "That's what you say when you don't know." "Yes," he said. "It is." Lydia ate her apple. Clara looked at the hallway ceiling. 40 minutes, and then the clerk opened the door. Vance ruled from the bench, which Aldridge later said was another good sign, that he'd made up his mind in the room and didn't need to take it home. He ruled in measured, precise sentences without the theatrical pauses that Forsyth used. Full custody with Ethan Wilder. Visitation rights for Margaret Vale, structured and court-supervised. 2 weekends per month and a 2-week window in summer, contingent on no further use of private agents in matters related to the child. Investigation referred to the county sheriff regarding the conduct of one man known as Cord and others in his employ. Case closed pending any appeal, which Vance noted would be reviewed by himself and not by any judge with prior relationship to either party. Clara sat in the bench and heard it and felt the shape of it settle and did not cry, which she'd been worried about, and looked at Ethan beside her, who was looking at the table in front of him with his jaw held steady and his eyes doing the thing they did when something was behind them that he was not letting out in a courtroom. She put her hand over his on the table. He turned his hand over and held it. Outside afterward, on the courthouse steps, Lydia ran directly at Ethan, and he caught her. On the bad leg, without the stick, and Clara saw the cost of it in his face, and saw him choose not to put her down anyway, and held her while the August sun came through thin clouds, and the street below went on being a street. Aldridge appeared beside Clara. "Forsyth will advise appeal," he said. "Will she take it?" "I don't know. The supervision condition complicates it for her. It's harder to maneuver an appeal than a first hearing." He looked at the street. "She may take the 2 weekends and the summer window and decide that's enough to work with." Is it enough? He was quiet a moment. Margaret Vale loves that child. I've been doing this long enough to read the difference. What she did was wrong and dangerous, and she was willing to use methods I find professionally objectionable. But she loved Caroline, and she loves Lydia. He picked up his case. People do terrible things out of real feeling. That's the hardest kind of case. Clara thought about the porch, the warmth in Margaret's voice that had been real, and the hardness underneath it that was also real. Will she hurt them if she has access? She said. I don't believe so. Not physically. She's a woman who operates through leverage and position, not force. The force was Cord's territory, and the court has named it. He looked at her. Watch the summer window. Make sure the terms are followed. Don't give her an inch of room outside the order. I won't, Clara said. I know. He offered his hand. Congratulations, Mrs. Wilder, on both counts. She shook it. Dale drove them back to the ranch in the wagon because the leg had done enough for one day and Ethan could not have sat a horse home without it showing, which was a pride consideration Clara left alone. Lydia sat in the wagon bed and talked without much stopping, which was her natural state when the pressure was off, and Clara sat on the bench beside Dale and listened to the child's voice and the sound of the road and the wind. How's the leg? Dale said quietly. It'll do. He nodded. They drove. You're going to need a third hand over winter, he said. The north pasture fence is a season behind where it ought to be, and 2 men can't cover the cattle rotation when the weather comes. Are you asking me to hire someone? I'm mentioning a fact. He kept his eyes on the road. There's also the matter of the Halloway well. Ethan's been talking about buying the Prentice water rights for 2 years and not doing it. I'll mention it to him. Dale looked at her sideways. You run anything before? A property? A homestead. Small. Small is still something. Most people who come at a ranch operation from outside come in thinking the scale changes everything. It changes some things, not the fundamentals. What are the fundamentals? He thought about it. Know what you have. Know what it costs. Don't pretend either one is something it isn't. He paused. And hire the right people and then trust them. That last one's the hardest, Clara said. Always is. The ranch came into view in the late afternoon, and Clara saw it differently than she had any of the other times she'd approached it. Not because it had changed, because something in her relationship to it had. The way a place changes when you've decided it's yours. Not owned, not managed, not passing through, but actually yours in the way that only happens when you've had the choice to leave and chosen not to. She had chosen not to. She was clear about that. Whatever happened next, she was clear about that. Harriet had supper ready, and the ranch hands ate that night, with a looseness they hadn't had since Clara arrived, and someone produced a bottle of something from somewhere, and Dale Purcell had a glass of it standing up, which Clara suspected was a significant event based on Harriet's expression. Ethan sat at the head of the table and talked more than he usually talked, and she watched him do it and thought, this is what he is when he's not fighting. This is the version of the man that the creek bed and the mountain and the hearing had covered over. She liked this version too. After supper, when Lydia had gone up and the hands had drifted out, and it was just the 2 of them at the kitchen table with the last of the coffee, Ethan said, I want to show you something tomorrow. What? The whole place. All of it. I've been treating you like a guest who might leave, and I'd like to stop doing that. Clara looked at him. You haven't been treating me like a guest. I've been treating you like someone who was here for a reason. I'd like to treat you like you're here. She thought about that distinction. It was a real one. All right, she said. Show me all of it. He showed her. 2 days after the hearing, leg and all, on horseback from before dawn to past noon, covering ground that took her breath away in its size and its variety. Not the blank flat space she'd assumed from the description, but country that changed on itself. Creek bottom to benchland to the long swells of the north pasture, where the grass was better than anything she'd seen in 3 drought years, and the cattle moved through it slow and heavy. He talked about the land the way a man talks about something he grew up knowing, not explaining it, just telling it, with the particular intimacy of long acquaintance. She asked questions, real ones, about water sources and winter pasture, and what the north fence actually needed. He answered them straight, without condescending to her ignorance or making more of her interest than it was, and she thought, this is how it will be. Not perfect, not easy. But this is the shape of it. 2 people talking straight about what's in front of them. She could work with that shape. She wrote to Dolph Prentice a week after they returned. She thanked him for the horse, which she returned with the letter, and told him the horse had done well in the mountains. She told him she was at the Wilder Ranch now, married, and that she would like, if he was willing, to continue the conversation about his water rights, and that she would come in person in September if he was agreeable. He wrote back in 3 lines. He said the horse had looked fine to him. He said he would see her in September. He said he was glad the girl was all right. She found the stamp in her coat pocket 3 weeks later and realized she still had the one from the tin at the cabin, the one she'd been saving to write to Denver. She sat at the kitchen desk and wrote to her brother-in-law. She told him she wouldn't be coming to Denver. She told him she had found something she hadn't known she was looking for, which was not, she wrote, the same as saying everything was solved and simple, because it was not solved and it was not simple, but it was real, and real was what had been missing. She signed it with her new name, the first time she'd written it down. She sealed the letter and used the stamp. The autumn came the way autumns came after drought years, fast and cold, the summer heat giving way in a single week, as if it had been waiting for permission to stop. The first snow came in October, a week before Lydia's birthday. It was light, not serious, just the mountain's version of a reminder, and it was gone by noon. Lydia turned 8 with the whole kitchen involved and a cake Harriet made that listed slightly to the left, which Lydia declared made it more interesting than a straight cake. She blew out the candles, and when Dale asked her what she wished for, she said, "I'm not telling," which made everyone laugh. Clara sat at the table in the noise of it and thought about the stamp and the letter and the choice not to wait anymore. And then she stopped thinking about it because Lydia had leaned over and put her head against Clara's shoulder in the matter-of-fact way she had. The way that said, "This is where I rest now," and Clara put one arm around her and listened to the room. The ranch did not fix everything. That is the honest accounting of it, and the story deserves honest accounting. Ethan's leg healed, but healed uneven and ached in cold weather for the rest of that year, and probably beyond. The appeal Margaret filed in October took 6 months to resolve and cost Aldridge and everyone else a hard winter of paperwork and preparation. And when it was finally dismissed by the reviewing court in March, it left a residue the way legal battles always do, a scar tissue of wariness that did not simply disappear when the papers were signed. The first time Margaret came for her supervised weekend, the house was quiet in a way that had teeth in it, and Lydia held Clara's hand on the porch until the wagon turned the corner, and Clara held it back. And neither of them said much. And when the wagon was gone, Lydia said, "That wasn't as bad as I thought." And Clara said, "It usually isn't," which was a thing she'd learned about dread, and which was true often enough to be worth passing on. Clara did not become a different person. That is the other honest thing. She still woke at 4 in the morning sometimes and lay in the dark accounting for things the way she'd done alone in the cabin. The habit of a woman who had been her own only resource for long enough that the habit had become structural. She still moved in rooms with the specific attentiveness of someone who had spent 3 years being careful. She still had days when the weight of Thomas and Rose sat on her in a way that had nothing to do with where she was or how well things had gone. Ethan had days too. She learned to read his and he learned to read hers, and they left each other alone in the right ways and didn't in the wrong ways, and they got that distinction wrong sometimes and right sometimes, which she suspected was how it went for most people who were trying to actually share a life rather than just occupying the same space. Lydia grew. That was its own thing to watch. The specific progress of a child who felt safe expanding into the space around her, becoming louder and more opinionated and more interested in everything and harder to say no to, which Clara could see in Dale's face was its own relief. The relief of someone who had watched a child go small with fear and was now watching her take up room. In the spring, a woman arrived at the ranch gate. She'd come from a farm 2 counties east, she said. A neighbor had told her that the Wilder Ranch sometimes had work. She had 2 children with her. She was thin in the way that meant the winter had been hard on her, and she was trying not to show it. Clara went down to the gate. She looked at the woman and the 2 children, and she thought about the creek bed, which she thought about less than she used to, but had not stopped thinking about. She thought about what it had cost her to give away the water and what it had given her and how those were not separate calculations. "Come up," she said. "Harriet's got coffee on." The woman looked at her with the specific gratitude that is almost harder to accept than hardship, because it requires you to believe you deserve the kindness, which is a harder thing. "I don't want charity," the woman said. "Nobody's offering any," Clara said. There's fence work on the north pasture if you know how to handle a post digger, and the children can earn their keep in the kitchen garden come planting time. The woman looked at the ranch, at the gate, at Clara. All right, she said. There would be others. Clara did not know that in that moment, but there would be others over the years. Women and children who came to the gate the way people come to places they've heard might let them in. And Clara let them in when there was work to offer, and sometimes when there was only a meal and a night's shelter, which Ethan supported because he had been the person at the gate once and knew what it was to need the door to open. That is not the resolution of the drought, or the legal battle, or the years of grief. Those things resolved themselves in their own time and incompletely, the way hard things do. It is just what the ranch became over the years, partly by decision and partly by accumulation. A place where people who had run out of road found a gate that was more often open than not. Clara had given away her last water in a dry creek bed to strangers dying in the dirt, and she had lost nothing that wasn't already gone and found everything she hadn't known to look for. She did not conclude from that there was some reliable principle at work in the universe, some ledger where the accounts balanced out. She had lived too many years with the evidence against that to believe it now. What she believed was simpler and harder to say. That some moments are the ones you get to choose in, even when everything else is out of your hands. That the choice you make when you have nothing left is the only one that tells you who you actually are. That she had been sitting in a one-room cabin, waiting for something to make a decision for her, and a child had cried across a burning valley, and she had gotten up. The rest had followed from that. Not perfectly. Not cleanly. Not the way stories sometimes present themselves after the fact, the shape imposed on the mess of actual living. But it had followed, and she was here, and the gate at the end of the ranch road was one she had come to know from both sides. The side where you're arriving with nothing, and the side where you open it. She had stood on both sides of that gate. She had chosen which one to stay on. That was enough. That was in fact more than enough, and she had learned by now to know the difference.